You are welcome for that fancy smoke introduction. So the purpose of this original video is to do two things. One, to introduce you to me, and two, to show you some terms that you may not be familiar with, because in my later videos, I'm going to use those terms. So you need to know what they are before we start. My name is Cameron Simmons. I'm a workers' compensation attorney down here on the coast of North Carolina. This is where I live and practice. However, I do handle cases throughout the state. I'm a board certified specialist in workers' compensation. Some states don't have board certification specialties. North Carolina does, in areas like workers' comp, criminal, bankruptcy, family, federal, elder law, a bunch of different things. And what it is it's the state bar, which is the governing body over lawyers, issues a test. You have to meet certain requirements. The first is you have to practice more than 5 years in a specific area, meaning workers' comp, employment, elder, one of those things. You have to devote a substantial portion of your practice to the section you want to be a specialty in or a specialist in. And then you have to take a test given to you by the state bar. And if you do all of those things and you pass the test, then you can identify yourself as a specialist, of which I am. And I've been for probably 20 years a specialist in workers' compensation. I've been practicing about 25, 26 years. I'm also a board certified mediator. And mediation will be explained a little later, but basically that means I go in and help parties resolve their differences. Again, that's more school and a test to become a mediator as well. I originally started 25 years ago as an insurance lawyer, meaning I would have represented insurance companies and employers against injured employees. After about 6 or 7 years, I switched sides and now I represent solely employees injured at work. In addition, do the mediation where I don't represent anyone, but I do help the sides resolve their differences. So enough about me. Let's get into the terms. If you recognize and understand all of the terms on your screen right now, then you don't need to listen to the rest of this tutorial. Just skip to whatever's next. If you don't, then you do. So let's go ahead and talk about each of these individually. First at the top is NCIC. That stands for North Carolina Industrial Commission. Those are the judges in workers' compensation. They handle all of the cases arising out of an injury at work. And that's just their formal name, North Carolina Industrial Commission. So anytime you see NCIC or hear the term North Carolina Industrial Commission, you know it means the judges. Next is plaintiff. Plaintiff is simply the injured employee. Next is defendant. Defendant is the opposite side. So plaintiff and defendant are the plaintiff sues the defendant. Plaintiff is injured employee. Defendant is normally the employer and the insurance company that the employer hires to provide coverage for workers' compensation. The next term is adjuster. Adjuster is the person who works at the insurance company who handles the injured worker's claim. All aspects of the claim, from providing medical treatment to determining whether they're going to accept or deny the claim, to providing weekly checks. If you need weekly checks, the adjuster handles all of that. And sometimes you can have more than one adjuster because sometimes they leave and change employers. So some of my clients have 3 and 4 adjusters over the life of the claim. The next term is carrier. Carrier is just another word for insurance company where the adjuster works. Not sure why they have another name for it, but they do. On to the next is hearing. Hearing is just a trial. So instead of a trial before a jury in workers' compensation, you have a bench trial, meaning there's just a judge whose name we're going to discuss in a second. But that a hearing is a trial. It's just the way workers' compensation talks about trials, as they call them hearings. A deposition is not just in workers' compensation, it's really in any lawsuit, and it's when the lawyers go off site, out of the courtroom, and take someone's testimony or statement with a court reporter present. So it's an out of court statement that's going to be offered as evidence in court. Mediation is the next term. That is in North Carolina a required step before trial. You heard me say earlier that I was a board certified mediator. The mediator is the one in charge of the mediation. And the mediation is just a sit down where you sit down across the table, or the employee sits down across the table from the insurance company and the employer, and they try to work out their differences before going to trial. Mediation is not trial. You are not put on the witness stand. You do not give testimony at mediation. You just sit around and talk about your case oftentimes about money. And if at the end of the mediation you settle, then the case is over. And if you don't, then the mediator will call an impasse. And that's just a fancy term for you didn't agree. And you move forward on to the next step, which is generally trial or a hearing. Same thing again. Next term, deputy commissioner. Remember, I said there was a judge. This is the first level of judges in workers' compensation. So if you go to a hearing, the first person you're going to see is a deputy commissioner. That is your trial judge. That trial judge is going, and a hearing or trial is trial, very much different than mediation. There are rules of evidence and procedure, and it's court, somewhat like you see on TV. And the deputy commissioner is the judge who's going to preside over that matter. Ultimately, that deputy commissioner would make a decision, sometimes months later after the trial or the hearing. And if whoever loses wants to appeal to the next level, still inside the North Carolina Industrial Commission, they appeal to a panel of judges called the full commission. That's our next term. That's normally a panel of 3 judges sitting in Raleigh. The employee and the employer normally don't show up at this appeal. It's also a hearing. But it's normally just the 2 lawyers or 3 lawyers or however many lawyers are involved arguing in front of that panel of judges. And that panel of judges is going to determine whether the previous judge, the deputy commissioner, made the correct decision or not. Last term you need to be familiar with are our appellate courts or appeals courts. Those are courts outside of the North Carolina Industrial Commission in the courts of general jurisdiction. They're generally the Court of Appeals, which is the next level of appeal, and the Supreme Court, which is the second level of appeal and the last level of appeal inside of North Carolina. Now that you're familiar with those terms and you've been introduced to me, let's end this video. You can move on to the next.